Charles Dickens grew up with a sharp eye and an even sharper heart, absorbing the world around him so intensely that everyday streets, ordinary people, and simple conversations seemed to transform into living stories inside his imagination. He was born in 1812 in Portsmouth, England, during a time of rapid industrial change, where busy ports, noisy factories, and crowded streets revealed both human ambition and deep social unfairness side by side. From early childhood, Charles experienced joy and instability together because while his family loved stories, laughter, and conversation, money problems constantly crept in and darkened daily life. When his father was sent to prison for debt, young Charles was forced to leave school and work in a factory, an experience that shaped his understanding of hardship more deeply than any lesson could. Inside that factory, surrounded by noise, repetition, and exhaustion, Charles observed loneliness, injustice, and quiet endurance with painful clarity, storing these images carefully inside his memory. He learned that society often ignored the suffering of children and the poor, not because people were cruel by nature, but because they were distracted, comfortable, or unwilling to look closely. These early struggles sharpened his empathy and fueled his determination to someday tell stories that would make people notice what they preferred to overlook. Even as a young boy, Charles loved reading and storytelling, finding refuge in books that transported him far beyond factory walls and narrow streets. Words became his escape and his weapon, allowing him to understand pain while imagining brighter futures. As he grew older, Charles trained himself carefully, learning shorthand and working as a reporter, because he understood that observing life closely was the foundation of powerful storytelling. Walking through London's streets, he studied faces, habits, conversations, and contradictions, noticing humor and tragedy existing side by side in everyday moments. The city itself felt alive to him, filled with hidden stories whispering from doorways, alleyways, and crowded markets. Charles learned that people often reveal their true selves not during dramatic moments, but during ordinary routines and small decisions. His early writing began appearing in newspapers and magazines, slowly drawing attention through wit, detail, and emotional honesty. Readers recognized something new in his voice, because his characters felt human rather than heroic, flawed rather than perfect. Charles possessed a rare ability to combine humor with sorrow, allowing laughter to exist without erasing pain. He believed stories should entertain while also gently challenging the reader's conscience. As serialized novels became popular, Dickens mastered the format, ending chapters with suspense that kept readers eagerly waiting for the next installment. This rhythm shaped his storytelling style, creating narratives that felt alive and constantly unfolding. Characters like Oliver Twist emerged, reflecting innocence struggling against cruelty within rigid social systems. Through children, workers, and outsiders, Dickens showed the human cost of poverty without preaching or cold judgment. Readers across England felt both entertained and unsettled, as familiar settings revealed uncomfortable truths. Charles wrote with energy and speed, often performing his stories aloud to feel their rhythm and emotion. He cared deeply about how his words sounded, believing language should move like music. As his popularity grew, so did his responsibility, because millions now listened to his voice. Dickens understood that stories had power beyond amusement, shaping how people thought about fairness and kindness. Despite success, his memories of hardship never faded, continuing to guide his empathy. He remained alert to injustice, especially where children were concerned. Rather than escaping his past, Charles transformed it into fuel for creativity. His characters often struggled, yet hope flickered persistently through their journeys. Dickens believed resilience mattered more than perfection. He balanced darkness with warmth, ensuring readers never drowned in despair. London remained his greatest inspiration, endlessly complex and contradictory. Each novel expanded his ability to capture society in motion. Through laughter, suspense, and emotional depth, Dickens invited readers to care. He wrote not from distance, but from lived understanding. Crowds gathered for his public readings, drawn by his dramatic voice and expressive energy. On stage, Charles transformed into storyteller and performer combined. Audiences laughed, cried, and leaned forward, fully absorbed. Dickens connected directly with people, bridging class divisions through shared emotion. His fame grew rapidly, yet curiosity continued pushing him forward. Charles refused to repeat himself lazily, constantly refining his craft. He understood stories must grow along with society. Though admired, he carried personal struggles quietly. Work became both joy and pressure, still imagination guided him steadily onward. His journey, however, was far from complete. As Charles Dickens moved deeper into his career, his stories grew broader and bolder, stretching beyond individual hardship to capture entire systems of injustice, hypocrisy, and neglect that shaped everyday life in Victorian England. He created characters who felt instantly familiar, not because they were ordinary, but because they reflected exaggerated truths that readers secretly recognized within neighbors, officials, families, and even themselves. Figures like Ebenezer Scrooge emerged as sharp mirrors, showing how greed, fear, and isolation could shrink a human soul, while compassion and connection could suddenly expand it again. Through A Christmas Carol, Dickens proved that a short story could carry enormous emotional power, mixing ghosts, humor, warmth, and moral reflection into a tale that felt timeless rather than preachy. Readers did not feel scolded or judged because Dickens invited them to change alongside his characters rather than standing above them. As his fame reached its height, Dickens traveled widely, giving public readings that turned storytelling into a shared experience filled with laughter, gasps, and quiet reflection. On stage, his voice shifted effortlessly between playful exaggeration and deep emotional gravity, making characters feel alive and close enough to touch. These performances demanded enormous energy, yet Dickens thrived on the connection, feeding off the audience's reactions and shared imagination. Behind the applause, however, the pressure of constant writing, performing, and public expectation weighed heavily on his health and personal life. Dickens worked relentlessly, driven by a belief that stories mattered deeply and that his voice carried responsibility. Novels like David Copperfield revealed deeply personal truths, blending fiction and memory until boundaries blurred between lived experience and imagined narrative. Through these stories, Dickens explored identity, growth, regret, and resilience with increasing emotional complexity. His humor sharpened, his compassion deepened, and his criticism of social cruelty grew more fearless. Child labor, unfair laws, cold institutions, and careless authority figures appeared repeatedly, not as abstract problems, but as forces shaping real lives. Despite confronting painful realities, Dickens refused to abandon hope, always leaving space for kindness, change, and redemption. He believed people could improve if only they truly saw one another. As the years passed, Dickens became not just a novelist, but a cultural force whose stories shaped how society talked about fairness and responsibility. Yet he remained restless, constantly revising, refining, and questioning his work. Fame did not make him comfortable, but alert. He worried about becoming predictable, knowing that dullness was the enemy of truth. Though his energy slowly declined, his imagination never softened. Even late in life, Dickens continued writing with urgency, as if time itself chased him forward. His final works carried darker tones, reflecting exhaustion and disillusionment alongside stubborn compassion. Still, his characters refused to surrender entirely to bitterness. They struggled, stumbled, learned, and occasionally found light again. When Charles Dickens died in 1870, England mourned not just an author, but a voice that had spoken directly to its conscience. Crowds gathered in silence, aware that an era had shifted. Yet Dickens did not truly disappear, because his stories continued moving freely through homes, classrooms, and imaginations. Generations of readers found themselves laughing at ridiculous characters while quietly reconsidering their own behavior. Teachers discovered that lessons wrapped in stories traveled farther than lectures ever could. Children met unforgettable characters who made them feel seen and understood. Writers learned that clarity, emotion, and observation could transform everyday life into meaningful narrative. Dickens taught that storytelling was not escape, but engagement. He showed that humor could open doors to empathy. His legacy rests not only in famous novels, but in the belief that words can soften hearts and sharpen awareness. Every crowded city street still echoes with his influence. Every story that balances laughter with truth carries his fingerprint. Dickens reminds us that compassion grows stronger when shared through narrative. He believed stories should move people toward kindness without shouting commands. His life proves that even painful beginnings can fuel meaningful creativity. Charles Dickens turned observation into art and memory into purpose. He revealed society to itself through ink and imagination. And if we listen carefully, his voice still whispers that noticing others is the first step toward justice. Because stories, when told with honesty and heart, never truly end.